Hello traders, this is Rich from tradesight. This is a look at our market leading ETFs for the coming week. This is going to be for the week of Monday, May 12th, 2014. Right now we've got kind of a little bit of a bounce day going in the NASDAQ side. The Qs are pretty decently above the day's open and getting some good distance above the day's VWAP. Mid caps not really splitting the difference, but we're definitely seeing a bounce back in the small caps here. The IWM. We do have one signal here today. Right now is an upside CPS in the diamonds, which is interesting. But it was mostly a flat week, so there really isn't a lot to be learned. We really have to see how they wind up resolving these levels next week. Moving on to the domestic sectors, we're down on volume here for a lot of these things. Next week is going to be expiration week, so we should have some better volume next week, especially maybe Wednesday before the actual expiration. So definitely be on your toes for Wednesday to have these things move around. Right now we're just generally a little bit better to buy. We've got a few upside CPS conditions here, but none of them with the volume bump. We do have a volume bump in the XHB, which is nice to see. Pretty strong day there. It's going to be a big candle on the chart. It's 1.6% above the day's open and pretty decently above the VWAP. IBB is also having a pretty decent day. They're really coming on fairly strongly here in the afternoon. It's more than 1% above the VWAP, which means that as we go into the close Friday, they're still bidding for this issue. One downside is the XLU. Got a downside CPS there. That's pretty weak today. It's pretty weak below the open, and it's also decently below the day's VWAP. Moving on to the commodity sector, a little bit of weakness here. The GDX has a downside CPS condition. We did play the GDX, not the GDX, but the GLD short today. Had a real nice short there, breaking under the 15-minute range. So that trade's still working. We've got a downside in the DBA and the DBC today. So we could see a little more weakness and follow through in those next week. XME is also notably weak here today. Bonds, not seeing too much. We had that weak auction for the 30 years on Thursday, and it just started to kind of just take a little bit off, and we're starting to see a little bit of a pullback after a pretty good uptrend in the bonds. Moving on to the foreign issues, very light volume here. There's an absence of any real movement here. There's really nothing moving around, even with going into a weekend with the geopolitical still very much fluid. Just not a lot of action here, so not much to be learned here. Moving on to the specials, there's really not too much on the long side here. One thing, the TNA, as you can see, is 3% above the day's open and 2% above the day's VWAP. So that definitely could come into play next week. That's also trading some pretty decent volume, and most of these are not today. SRS has a contra candle, as does the FXP. So keep an eye on that. TWM is also trading some decent volume, and that's 2% below the day's open and 1.5% below the day's VWAP. TBT, which is the double inverse of the TLT, is showing an RPS to the downside, so that could be interesting for next week. Okay, and here's a look at the our watch list with the bar counts on it. You can see in the countdown phases, there's not a lot here. We're really kind of in the middle of a lot of these things. Have to just going to be a little bit more patient, let those develop. So we're really not at risk here of anything really popping up here this week. As far as the startup phases go, we're really not close to anything on any of the majors here. So we're going to get probably through next week before we get any 8s or 9s, which is another takeaway here. So we're just kind of in the middle of everything right now, and we definitely could have there's some room for some decent movement without a risk of reversal. So, you know, last 2 weeks have been kind of range bound and directionless, and hopefully we'll get a move out of that. Just remember that recall that there are a lot of 13s in place from a week ago, so those could still influence trade in the beginning of the week. All right, folks. As always, thanks for listening. This has been Rich for tradesight.